My topic is Obama administration, American foreign policy in the Middle East. Let me start by saying that, pointing out the obvious, that we're halfway through. We've got 4 years under our belt, and we've got 4 years to go. And the second obvious point is the Middle East is hardly the only challenge to the United States in the world today. North Korea comes right to mind, China, Russia, Venezuela. But the Middle East stands out by being the region that presents the most crises, the most varied crises. Let me just mention some of them. First, there's weapons of mass destruction. Most obviously Iran, but also Syria, which had been trying to build them, Iraq, which had tried to build them. The Saudi Arabian government is making moves to try and build them. Syria has the largest chemical arsenal in the world. WMD is a major problem in the Middle East. It's been deployed many times, most particularly by the Iraqi government against its own people. WMD is a big problem. But even bigger problem, perhaps, is Islamism, which I would characterize as the third totalitarian movement of modern times after the fascist and communist. Different, of course, in many details, but similar in seeking worldwide hegemony and using brutal methods to get there. Islamism is the attempt to recreate the wealth and power that the Muslims had a millennium ago by applying Islamic law in its entirety and severity. And it's everywhere, but let me just mention Tunisia, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Afghanistan for starters, but it's everywhere. And it's also here. Anarchy. Anarchy is a problem that has not been much noted, but because the Middle East has been so dictatorial and oppressive that one tends not to see this. But this has been creeping up, starting in Afghanistan in the 1970s. Large tracts of land that are simply under no one's control. There's a saying in Arabic, better 1,000 years of tyranny than a day of anarchy. At least in tyranny you know what the rules are roughly, but in anarchy everything is up for grabs. And Afghanistan was the first. Lebanon in the 1970s became anarchic and has never stopped being anarchic, or at least substantial parts of it. Somalia is the very picture of anarchy. The Palestinian Authority has been anarchic for some 15 years now. Pakistan has large swaths that are anarchic. Iraq as well. Yemen is another byword for anarchy. So many different contending forces. Libya, since the overthrow of Gaddafi. Syria, in the last couple of years, has become in large part anarchic. Mali, of late. Anarchy is more diffuse than tyranny, but for those who are living through it, even more horrendous. Terrorism is a Middle Eastern almost invention. It is most well-known, used against Israel, but most frequent in Pakistan and in Iraq. We have an incident of terrorism and the whole country is focused on 3 deaths. Routinely there are 50, 60 deaths here and there in Pakistan and Iraq, and it's just part of the landscape at this point. Economic collapse is a problem in the Middle East, and here I'd point especially to Egypt. Egypt is on the verge of hunger. If you're watching it at all, every source of income is going down, from cotton to the Suez Canal, to remittances, to tourism, to oil sales, oil and gas sales, and nothing's taking the place. Egypt has the single largest importation of foodstuffs in the world in absolute terms and relative terms as well. More than half the caloric intake of Egypt is imported, i.e. bought on the open market, and you need hard currency for it. Egyptian hard currency at the time of Mubarak's resignation 2 and a bit years ago was $38 billion, not much by American standards, but a lot by Egyptian. It is now, formally speaking, about 6. But we read that the Egyptian government owes $5 billion to the oil companies, energy companies, so it's probably negative at this point. And one wonders where the food's going to come from. The food brokers are demanding cash from Egyptians now. They're not going to take credit anymore. It boggles the mind what is ahead for Egypt. The region has the world's most complex conflict, the most ongoing war, the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's easily a century old, and absorbs energy around the world, fascinates diplomats. John Kerry gets in, and the first thing he wants to do is solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, more important than anything else in his mind. And he is indeed spending time, good long hours, as did Condoleezza Rice before him, as did many other Secretary of States. Many presidents have devoted outlandish amounts of time to this rather small but utterly fascinating political problem. So, WMD, Islamism, anarchy, terrorism, economic collapse, Arab-Israeli conflict, and then there are other things. Drug trafficking, drug taking, ecological disaster. There is a town in Yemen, I can't forget this, a town in Yemen where I've read that each villager gets 1 liter, 1 quart of water per day. That's rationing. There's no water left in Yemen. The region is full of problems. Rivers, ancient rivers, which have been supplying peoples for millennia, are now drying up because of overuse. So that's by way of the cheery background of the Middle East, a region that really stands by itself in terms of volatility and danger, in terms of ideological, weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, and so forth. Refugees coming out penniless. By way of historical background, looking at the American role, we basically didn't have much of a role until World War II. We were second fiddle to the British and quite happy with that. The British had a long, not terribly successful career in the Middle East. We let them take the lead. The first really major American presence was due to the Saudi unwillingness to deal with the British and turn to the Americans to drill for oil. So oil was really in the 1930s the first attention-getting aspect of the Middle East. And then came 2 more rather quickly in the aftermath of World War II, namely the Soviet Union, which had not been a competitor until 1945, and Israel. It's these 3 factors that dominated the Cold War years from 1945 to, say, 1990. And there was endlessly complex interchange between these 3, oil, Soviets, and Israel. So to give you an example of what I mean, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia was vehemently anti-Soviet, hated the communism, and was vehemently anti-Israel and hated Zionism. So we worked easily with him on one and not so easily with him on the other. He ruled until 1960, from 64 to 75, if memory serves. The Soviet Union, well, it was the second country after the United States to recognize Israel and supplied, via Czechoslovakia, Israel with the key arsenal for its war of independence, and yet then turned against Israel in a vicious way, whose legacy still lives on. The Soviet Union changed sides. Israel itself had a very changing role in American foreign policy. Basically, I'd say in the 25 years before 1970, Zionism and Israel were seen as a liability in the Cold War. Notable figures in the 1950s were anti-Israel because they saw Israel as an impediment of having good relations with the Arabs in order to stop the Soviet Union. In 1970, an incident long forgotten but critical at the time, the Israelis saved the King of Jordan, and the Nixon administration, which had hitherto been very cool, warmed up, and more broadly, conservatives and security-oriented people warmed up to Israel as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Israel proved its worth. So Israel went from being a liability to an asset. So you see, whether it be King Faisal of Saudi Arabia or the Soviet Union or Israel, things were shifting all the time during this 45-year period. But that's history. Let's look at the post-Cold War period. The Soviet Union is gone, and Islamism is the new threat. But the United States government is not willing to recognize this fact. Let me point to you a key speech given in June of 1992, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in the midst of a crisis in Algeria, a speech given by then Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, Edward Jerigian. And I'll quote you one passage from it. The U.S. government does not view Islam as the next ism, confronting the West or threatening world peace. That is an overly simplistic response to a complex reality. the Cold War is not being replaced with a new competition between Islam and the West. Georgian went on to say that basically we can work with the political Islamists, the non-violent Islamists, but the violent ones are our enemy. So bin Laden is our enemy. Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey is a potential partner and friend. Now, he's right that Islam didn't replace communism. It's a straw man. But he's wrong in that Islamism, to some extent, did replace. I mean, just as communism replaced fascism as our problem in 1945, so Islamism replaced communism, a Soviet threat, in 1990. But the U.S. government didn't see it, nor did other governments, nor did most public-private institutions, media, academy, the arts, just then and now, 20-odd years later, a great unwillingness to see Islamism as the ideology that threatens us, a willingness to work with it, as symbolized just a couple of days ago by the arrival in Egypt of 140,000 tear gas canisters sold to the Egyptians by the U.S. government. Now, I was totally against the F-16s and the Abrams tanks, but at least I could understand there's a logic that you think, if you're an American governmental bureaucrat or politician, that there's a tie with the Egyptian military and you want to keep that tie, sustain it, build it. I don't agree, but I can understand that. But 140,000 canisters of tear gas? That means we are supporting the government of Mohammed Morsi against the liberals, the non-Islamists who are on the streets trying to fight him. That's where that speech, 21 years later, here we are. Now, there have been 3 presidencies since this was given under George H.W. Bush, and all of them were deeply confused about this issue. Bill Clinton made it his goal to tame the Islamic Republic of Iran. There was a roadmap and all sorts of efforts to bring the Iranians in. He also tried to tame the PLO, who was the most frequent foreign visitor to the Oval Office during his 8 years, but Yasser Arafat. Now, we are in the spirit of bipartisanship here at the Jackson-Kyl Lecture, so I will fault George W. Bush equally with his Democratic predecessor and successor. I think he did a terrible job in the Middle East. I've argued, I'm a Republican, I have argued strenuously for those 8 years with fellow Republicans. I thought he just completely got it wrong. Yes, get rid of Saddam Hussein, but what is this business about a free and prosperous Iraq? A decent Iraq would have been enough. And what a catastrophe that turned out to be for us and for the Iraqis to try and nation build. Democratization. Did you ever think about who will win these elections, Mr. President? Accepting the idea of Palestine, it was George W. Bush who pushed Palestine, not Clinton. So I could spend the entire time lambasting George W. Bush, but that's history, and I won't. Which brings us to the current president. Now, I'd like to preface my comments about Barack Obama by saying that I think his presidency embodies a deep contradiction. He himself suffers from an internal paradox. On the one hand, as a leftist, he despises the United States, and I use that word despise carefully, and sees it as a force for ill in the world. On the other hand, as president, he is judged by how well the country fares during his tenure. He cannot reconcile the contradiction of these two imperatives. If he wants to be celebrated as a great leader, he has to forward American interests. But if he wants to implement his preferred policies, he subverts the country. I think this is evident, this contradiction in foreign policy especially. And Middle East is a good case, and let's take the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is always the most prominent issue. 10 years ago, before his federal career began, he consorted with far leftists and vicious anti-Zionists, such as Edward Said, Rashid Khalidi, and least known, but perhaps worst of all, Ali Abu Nilma. Now, we don't actually know what Obama was saying and thinking then. He was not well known enough to have his thoughts on the Middle East published. There was actually a party for Rashid Khalidi's going away that we've all been trying to get our hands on, where Obama made some remarks in, I think, 2005. We don't have them. So it's a bit guilt by association. It appears that this is the crowd he was running with, and it appears he had views comparable to theirs. Well, that's not how he's been as president. And let me take as the best example the visit to Israel just a month ago, which was extraordinary in its warmth, in its undoing of various prior statements. He had earlier said he wanted Israel to return to the 67 lines. That he undid. He earlier had said that Israel came into existence due to the Holocaust. Now he spoke of 3,000 years of Jewish history. He took away the preconditions that he had imposed before. And most spectacularly of all, for the first time, he, as American president, said that he demands that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. No president had ever said anything like that before. So you have these contradictions between where he started out and where he has at this point ended up. He moved to the center, in short. He couldn't, or chose not to, implement these extreme anti-Zionist policies. Or to put it in Washington terms, where you stand is where you sit, and he sits a different place where he used to be. But still, this leaves a lot of loose ends, and the past 4 years and a bit have made them apparent. And I'd like to give you a bunch of them to show the problems that we have had and are likely to continue to have. So, number one, in June of 2009, when there's this remarkable upsurge of Iranians against the foul Islamic Republic of Iran, Prime Minister Brown of Britain and President Sarkozy of France and Chancellor Merkel of Germany are all outspoken, but President Obama is silent. Pretty embarrassing moment to be an American. And yet, 2 years later, in early 2011, when the crowds are against rather more friendly regimes in Tunisia and especially in Egypt, we are with them. So we're silent against Khamenei and we're vocal against Mubarak. What kind of logic is there to that? Second, as I alluded to before, there was a demand in May of 2009 that the Israelis not build anything in any housing in either the West Bank or even Eastern Jerusalem. And then now he's backed down from it. And as again, third, as I alluded to before, Kerry is obsessed, Secretary of State Kerry is obsessed with the Arab-Israeli conflict, as though there's nothing else going on in the world. This, like prior Secretaries of States and prior presidents, is his holy grail. I speculate that that's because of Nobel Prize. You know, there have been a couple on this, and this is the way, if you want to build yourself a legacy, you do it with this. But what a way to go. Fourth, Obama literally hugs Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, who I would characterize as the most dangerous figure in the region. He's not the worst, but he's the most dangerous in the sense that he is the powerful Prime Minister, 3 times elected, of arguably the most powerful state in the region, substantial population, close to 80 million, real economy, strategic location, a longtime ally of the United States since the Korean War, member of NATO, and yet he's turning this country against us, or the ruling party is turning this country against us. It is, to give you just one example, the country where the United States ranks lowest in the world. If you ask, what do you think of the United States? They're like, 6 Turks who think well of the United States, or put it less colorfully, they're like 9%, 10%. We are more unpopular in Turkey than anywhere else. The AKP, the party that Erdogan heads, has been in charge of this change over the last decade. And Obama has cited him as one of his 5 friendliest foreign leaders, and they work together. We accede to the Turks and all sorts of things. This is a disaster from my point of view. Iran is the greatest short-term danger, of course, with the buildup of the nuclear weapons, but in the long term, I think Iran is potentially a friend, and Turkey is, I think, likely to be our greatest problem. We are blind to it. Fifth, talking about Iran, 4 more years have gone by, and now I can't say nothing has happened. I don't know enough to say that. And there could be all sorts of things going on below the surface, behind the screen. But we're very close to a deadline. From what I understand from informed sources, if we haven't done anything, or the Israelis haven't done anything, by September, the Iranians will have reached the point, crossed the red line, reached the point of breakout. So it's not just a matter of months, but even weeks before the two governments face the choice of bomb or get the bomb. And you know, I can't judge in anticipation, but I'm worried that we're not going to do anything about it, and I'm worried that the Israelis will have a much harder time doing something about it and will be less effective. We can do more with more assurance than the Israelis can. Our military is many, many times larger and indeed closer. Sixth point would be that Obama sent added troops to Afghanistan, and as he was sending them, he gave the deadline for their leaving. I mean, who fights a war that way? You can't win if you're going to announce in advance your deadline. 7th point about Syria. There's been no policy, sort of waivers. I will take Frank's mention of Senator Kyl, negative response to my piece, to tell you what my idea is. I gave my article a few days ago the probably unfortunate title of Support Assad. I do so in the spirit of helping the losing party. My goal is not to support Assad, you can be sure of that. This is a monster. I have nothing positive to say about Assad. But as in the Iraq-Iran war 25 years ago, I don't want there to be a winner. And I'm saying support Assad on the understanding that Assad is losing. If you can tell me that Assad's not losing, in fact it's balanced, I don't want to support Assad. If you're going to tell me that Assad is winning, I'll say support the rebels. So it's a fairly cynical balance of power approach, as the saying went during the Iraq-Iran war, may they both lose. I'm in no fashion supporting Assad. I don't think we can manipulate the rebels as the government wishes to, the US government, by supporting the good ones and bombing the bad ones. I just don't think we have that kind of finesse. I think keeping the Turkish-backed Sunni Islamists at war with the Iranian-backed Shiite Islamists is okay. To put in smaller terms, to have Hamas fighting Hezbollah is okay. I'd rather have them fighting each other than making mischief in the outside world. But the Obama administration has virtually no policy. It just doesn't do much. 8th point would be the policy towards Egypt, where we are supporting this small-minded, increasingly despotic, Islamist presidency of Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, as symbolized by the tear gas canisters I mentioned before, but much more. The thing is, we can't save this government. We're not going to be spending the $30, $40 billion a year that are necessary to fund it. It's going to go down, and our reputation is going down with it. 9th point would be the focus on al-Qaeda. Hooray for getting rid of Osama bin Laden. Hooray for some of the drone attacks. But the administration tends to see Islamism as shriveled down into al-Qaeda. If you don't actually have an al-Qaeda card in your membership card in your pocket, one, you're not a terrorist, and two, you're not an Islamist. It's a tiny, tiny representation of this mammoth international totalitarian movement. 10th, we backed the rebels in Benghazi, Libya, without knowing who they were, and came a cropper for it. And then secondly, we had this problem 9/11, 2012, and Benghazi, just trying to pretend didn't take place. I wish the resources of the media were focused on this abomination, on the survivors of it, on the how and wherefore of what happened on that day. But from Mitt Romney on, no one really has been willing to push this. Well, CSP has, but not many others. So here are 10 items, problems, and I could go on and on, but just many, many. Looking at patterns, other than use of force against Al-Qaeda, I think there's a guilt about using American power, deploying American power. Secondly, I think there's a mindset that minimizes the difference between friend and foe. And thirdly, and most profoundly, I think this administration wishes it were Belgium, wishes it were just a small part of the Western consensus, and joined in with the Netherlands and France and other neighbors to be part of the pack. Leading from behind is one expression of that. But I think it's more than that. It's feeling ill at ease with the responsibility of power. We've seen this before. Jimmy Carter comes right to mind, but it's a dangerous weakness. Jimmy Carter only had 4 years. This time around we have 8. And if the first administration looked bad, I worry about the second. There's no accountability as there was. And we have Brennan, Hagel, and Kerry, and I've been debating with myself in preparation for this talk whether I should use the following terminology or not, and I guess I'm going to use it. Brennan, Hagel, and Kerry, the 3 clowns. So much worse than their predecessors, who were not great either. So we're in for an interesting time. We have a record of failure, and hold on to your hats. More's to come. Thank you.
Let me toss out a question or two, if I may, just to start things off, and then we'll open it up. You returned again and again to a lack of clarity and understanding of the nature of the problem that we're confronting. Specifically, I think you used on numerous occasions the term Islamist. This has, as you may know, now been dropped from the approved AP handbook of terminology, and maybe you'd say a word about what's up with that, and to the extent that it is, as one following the Muslim Brotherhood as I do, believe that this is something of a coup for them. What should we do about it? I wish you'd dwell a little bit on the democracy project point too, because I think part of what has brought people, including our friend Senator Kyl, to a different conclusion than you on Syria is an abiding hope, despite hard experience, that somehow this time will come out differently if only democracy is allowed to operate. And just finally on Turkey, I couldn't agree more with your characterization of Turkey as a serious problem, and one that is still not recognized as such, neither by the administration nor by the American people, I think, at this point. I've been very impressed by some of the work that you have published in Middle East Quarterly on the Gulen movement, and maybe you could say a word about its role both in Turkey and in the West, including here. So just a little food for thought.
There is a reluctance to see that there is a totalitarian movement that I'm calling Islamist. Different names: totalitarian Islam, political Islam, fundamentalist Islam, extremist Islam. It's very clearly something quite distinct. I mean, when you have say a mosque in Timbuktu that's been there since 1400, and along come a bunch of guys a few months ago and break it down, its doors and so forth. It's a 100% Muslim environment, there's something different here. In Egypt, there's something different. In all these, Iran, there's something different. There's this intent to apply Islamic law. We in the West are reluctant to confront religion, one. We're reluctant to take on the Islamists in the West who deny that there's any such phenomenon. They're just simply Muslims. We're reluctant to annoy the Islamists in the West or elsewhere by using this term. And we're reluctant, I think most importantly, to make the changes that are necessary if you recognize this as an autonomous phenomenon. For example, in the aftermath of the Fort Hood massacre in November 2009, the Army Chief of Staff mumbled something about multiculturalism and the importance of maintaining it in the military. I think what he was really saying is not a paean to multiculturalism. It's hardly the basic value of the Army. But rather he was implicitly saying that if we were to recognize that Major Malik Hassan, Major Hassan was an Islamist, which he clearly was. Everything about his life in prior years suggests he was. What the Army Chief of Staff was saying, if we were to recognize that, then we have to change our procedures in the Army. It'll be a different Army. We don't want to do that. It's not a serious enough problem. So I think that or the AP nomenclature all fit a pattern of saying, look, this isn't that important. We can go along pretending this isn't really, we know among ourselves it truly is, but we can go along pretending, one, for the Islamists, Muslims more broadly in our country, and two, in order not to have to make substantial changes, say to getting on a plane. You know, we're content looking for weapons and not looking at people, because so far the consequences of this have not been that bad. So I think only if there is truly a major threat will we get serious about airline security or our nomenclature. But until then, we can get away with it, and so we are. Democracy Project. I mean, as an American, I take great pride in the fact that so many countries around the world owe their political participation, their decency, their democracy to American efforts over the past century. We have been the inspiration, we've been pushing for it, and it's an extraordinary record and a unique record. There's no other country in the world that approaches this in any way. So, you know, 3 cheers for what we've done. And you can look at Latin America, you can look at Eastern Europe, Western Europe, South Asia, especially East Asia, and see vindication of this over and over again. The Middle East stands out, and the Middle East stands out because Americans have peered over the abyss and seen that if Vox Populi gets its way, it'll be more hostile to us than the existing dictators and kings and presidents and emirs and the like. We have historically had better relations with the dictators, be they princely or military, than we have had with popular opinion, or the population at large. And so we've worked with these dictators. Okay, not been terrible, had some success. And yet, eventually that had to end. We had to find our morals, we had to find our compass, and this happened in 2003 when George W. Bush said, okay, enough. No more focus on stability, now we're going to focus on democracy. In of itself, it was a good idea. I praised it at the time. I thought the problem was in execution. And indeed, the execution was badly flawed. It's a great idea. But I think the proper execution is to start with dog catcher, and to start with, in terms of election, and municipal councils, and build your way up. It's also a matter of rule of law and minority rights and freedom of speech and the whole panoply of civil society that we know of in this country. You don't just elect somebody. But that's what we did what we oversaw in Iraq and urged elsewhere was just snap elections. It was 22 months between Saddam Hussein's overthrow and the first election in January of 2005, and I was of the belief then that it should have been 22 years. It should have been a gradual build-up to electing the prime minister and president. It was much too fast. In typical American fashion, we want it done yesterday, get it. You can't take a Stalinist dictatorship out and replace it with democracy in under 2 years, and we failed. So I think it's a great idea, but it has to be done slowly, slowly, as we did, for example, in Taiwan, or we oversaw in Taiwan or South Korea. Gently, gently, slowly, slowly, take your time. What I advocated in Iraq was what I called a democracy-minded strongman, a general or someone who would get control of the country and we can nudge along. But we made this mistake, for example, in Gaza, where Hamas took over. We made the mistake here and there. So while we have no difference in purpose, all of us would like to see a truly democratic, meaning civil society, Middle East. I would say that this is a long, hard slog, and we must appreciate that. We must go slowly. We must continue to put pressure, for example, on Mubarak. He was there for 30 years. Had we started the pressure in 1981 instead of 2005, and had we continuously applied that pressure, I think things would look much better now than they do. So we have this moral responsibility of pushing for democracy, but we did it too late and too fast. It's even later now, but we can do it, but do it gently, do it carefully, do it slowly, do it modestly. Not this surge of impatience and let's have a democratic prime minister. And your third point about Turkey, the Gülen movement, Islamists are generally pretty obvious. They just intent on applying Islamic law, which by and large means two things in its first manifestation. One, Muslim superiority over non-Muslim, and male superiority over female. And they just bristle with these two things. And everything about them shouts out this. But in Turkey, the Islamists are more subtle. They wear jackets and ties, or female European fashion, with maybe a hijab on top. And even the hijab can be very comely. You can do it very nicely. And it's hard to figure out exactly who's an Islamist and who isn't. And for years there was debate over Gülen because he doesn't talk like an Islamist. And even Erdogan, there's still debate over him. And yet I think it's quite clear that both of them are. And by the way, they've had a falling out between them. There's significant tensions between them. So if you want to... And the opposition's hope in Turkey is that their falling out and other falling out among Islamists will crack the AKP domination because the opposition is so weak. But Gülen has formed a massive organization. It's thought to have some 5 million supporters, donors, members. He's built hundreds of schools around the world, including something like 135 in this country alone. And they're the most innocuous-looking places. I gave a talk a couple years ago in Adelaide, Australia, and I said something disparaging about Gülen and his schools. And a young man came up to me and said, "Would you like to go visit one?" I said, "Sure." So we went off, and I went to they're always so nicely named, morning, good morning, sunrise, mercy, harmony, exactly. So we went to the school, and it was perfectly lovely. I can't tell you I found anything wrong with it at all. They were not bristling with anything. There's a certain interesting kind of Turkish element to it, but that in itself is not objectionable. They're very clever, and they are building here in Washington. There's the Rumi Forum, which is a sophisticated, interesting place. Rumi, R-U-M-I, named after Jalaluddin Rumi, the sainted mystic who lived in Konya 800 years ago. So this points to a larger problem, which is, in my view, the ultimate danger of Islamism are not the Osama bin Ladens, but the Gülens and the Erdogans. Now, you can And my argument is that they're successful. They can build an economy, they can win elections, they civilized, run a normal government. Granted, it has its problems, but it's not North Korea. It's not Iraq under Saddam Hussein. And you could come back and say, well, what's wrong with that? If it's so decent, why is it a problem? Well, my analogy would be to say the Italian Communist Party taking over in the late 1940s. They weren't Stalin. There was no gulag, and probably never would have been a gulag. But their goal was a communist system. And the imperatives of getting to a full communist system would have led them to all sorts of nasty measures, maybe not a gulag, but lots else. And likewise with Turkey and Tunisia, other Islamist states that are not barbaric in the way that, say, the Sudanese or Iranian states are, that they're going in that direction. Hostility towards the West, rogue activities increasingly, jailing of generals and journalists and anyone who gets in their way. It's creating a climate of fear and aggression. Now, it's still the beginning, but I think should this party stay in power, and I don't believe there'll be real democratic elections once they're no longer so popular, we'll see the true fangs of this regime come out. So that's why I worry about it so much. And Gulen is part of it.
Daniel, thank you. Let's open it up to questions. If you'll identify yourself and speak loudly. Do we have a mic? Oh, we do. Excellent. Let's start right here. Right here, sir. Do we have a mic here? Coming. Good.
Hi, I'm Andrew Harrod. We just met David, research for you as well. I was just curious, you touched upon it in Iraq, and in the three instances of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, we have sort of similar problems of we're dealing with, say, one threat, but then we're not really quite sure what comes after it and what do we do after that. Could you flesh out perhaps in Iraq a little bit more, and also Afghanistan and Libya, what would be sort of policy alternatives there to try to sort of thread the needle and deal with such multiple threats in those countries?
Well, looking at them chronologically, in Afghanistan, we were responding to 9/11, had the full panoply of NATO backing, and we took out the Taliban within weeks, though if you recall at the time there was fear that this would be a Vietnam and go on for years and decades, but it took weeks. And there we were. We inherited Afghanistan. And the first thing we tried to do, let me step back and say, I think 1945 is the implicit paradigm for all these countries, particularly Iraq and Afghanistan. In other words, in 1945, we defeated Germany, Japan, Italy, Hungary, and many other lesser countries. And what we did then was something unprecedented in world history. We didn't plunder them. We funded them. We rebuilt them. And it was a tremendous success. And that paradigm remains the dominant one. That's what we do. We win wars. We rebuild our enemies. We don't even think about it. It's just, there was this mock Pottery Barn statement a decade ago: you broke it, you own it. That's not the norm in world history. You win, you plunder, you get benefits, and you leave, or you oppress. So we created an entirely new model for victory, unlike, say, the British and French in 1918, who plundered Germany, and look what they got as a consequence. So this is our guiding model, and so we win, kind of unexpectedly. Suddenly, we're hit on September 11th. We strike back on October 7th. We win on November 15th, and there we have it. We have a country we haven't given much thought to. And so what we naturally do is rebuild. We pour in money and troops and the other accessories of victory. And in Iraq, we do the same thing. Not so much in Libya, but in those two. And we think of them as Japan and Germany, but they're not. Not for obvious reasons, two most major of which would be that these are Muslim countries, and Muslims have a very strong antipathy to being dominated by non-Muslims, much more so than other peoples around the world. Ask the French and the British about their colonial experiences. And secondly, we fought the governments and not the people. In World War II, we fought Germany and Japan. Here we fought the Taliban and Saddam Hussein. And emblematic of that was that we sent out planes simultaneously in October, November of 2001 to Afghanistan with bombs in some of them and foodstuffs in other of them. I mean, who could imagine such a war-fighting notion in World War II? We never sent food to the Germans and Japanese. We saw the whole population as the enemy. Here we didn't. And conversely, the enemy didn't see us as the victor. It didn't see itself as defeated. Didn't even recognize that we were the liberator. Within weeks in Iraq in particular, there was a sense that the Iraqis had done this. We were footnotes to the entire enterprise. Quite astonishing, but very important. So what I would have done in both countries would have been to hand over the country to some designated general, warlord, politician who we thought we could work with, give him real powers to secure the country, and to be there as a very powerful influence on the development of the country, but not to run it, as we did do, and not to go right to democracy, as we did do. So I think it's one of the failings of American foreign policy, over and over again, not just these two instances, where we push others aside and say, we can do a better job, get out of our way, we'll handle this. And so we did road building and electricity grid building and constitution writing and curriculum writing and intertribal relations coordinating and all these things. To me, the most astonishing picture of the entire episode was seeing some American soldier freighted down with incredible amounts of stuff on him, walking through the streets of Fallujah. I'm thinking, what is an American soldier doing being a policeman in Iraq? This is not what we do. We do strategic, we don't do tactical. We do planes, and we do things on a large level. We don't have soldiers on the ground as policemen. So we should not have taken that kind of responsibility. We did not own Iraq. We did not own Afghanistan. We should have temporarily held it till we could hand it over to someone who would rule it, not us. Richard?
Professor Pipes, Richard Hellman of CPAC and Merkel, appreciate your excellent summary of where we are in the Middle East. And I think, if anything, perhaps you've been a bit too kind, or perhaps I didn't understand every element of your talk. I would ask, for example, if it may not be the case that this White House has not changed its policy toward Israel and the PLO, but only its tactics, so that perhaps the new incumbent, who you again rather kindly characterized as a clown in the State Department, that perhaps he's going to be, to the best of his ability, the bad cop, and enforce the what used to be called the Saudi, now for the last 10 years, I guess, the Arab Peace Initiative, in which Israel goes back to its 67 boundaries, and the State Department, when someone asked, are you going to modify that, they said, no, we're going to stick with that plan, and moves some 650,000 Jews out of most of historic Israel and even the Golan Heights, and puts, I don't know, 75,000, 100,000 U.S. troops in there, and $500 billion or $1 trillion worth of aid to move those Israelis out and move 1 million or more Palestinian Arabs in. I mean, is that not what Kerry is trying to do, with, of course, President Obama standing back and saying he loves Israel and will defend Israel, etc.? Is that perhaps not a good cop, bad cop dichotomy there, where they let Kerry behind the scenes twist the arms or other appendages of the Israelis to get them to go along with this gag?
Well, I can't say you're wrong. but I also don't know that you're right. There is an argument in this town as to how to deal with Israel. And the side that prevailed during the first Obama administration was a side that said, you show him who's boss. And you pick a fight with him. What were Obama's words? Something about there was not enough distance between Bush and the Israelis. You put some distance. You pick a fight. Like when Biden went in March of 2010 and the Israelis did some minor bureaucratic approval of some houses, suddenly it was an international furor. That was picking a fight. There was no need for that. It didn't work. It was a complete bust. From the administration's point of view, not mine, it didn't go anywhere. I can go into details, but briefly put, the administration said there can be no, the Israelis have to stop building in the eastern Jerusalem and West Bank, and the Palestinians, who'd never put that condition out before, said, yeah, right, no more building. And so nothing happened because the Israelis continued to build, except for a 10-month interval. And so nothing has happened. So this was a disaster from the White House point of view. Everything failed. And so it could well be that this love bomb of the trip to Israel was saying, okay, we're changing track. We're trying something else now. Not a fight with Israel, but sweetness and harmony with the Clinton-Rabin relationship as the model. And this is how we're going to get what we want from you. And we're going to be so nice to you that you can't say no to us. And so, in other words, that trip had a bill maybe to be given by Kerry, maybe by Obama himself, I don't know, but that there's a cost for this. That could very well be true. But we don't know. It's speculation. I think it's quite likely, but it hasn't come yet. Nothing that Kerry has said on these many visits to Israel has quite indicated that for sure, but it's certainly possible. Let me also add a kind of ironic commentary to this. As someone who believes that the Arab-Israeli conflict is a war, and that wars are ended by one side losing, and not through negotiations, and as someone who wants Israel to win and the Palestinians to lose, I thought the last 4 years were pretty dandy, because while there were tensions and Obama neglected Netanyahu in the White House for dinner and things like that, the really good news was that the Israelis didn't give anything up. That the kind of concessions that Rabin made to Clinton were not happening. And if it meant that relations were cool, so be it. Relations, warm, cool, doesn't matter. But when the Israelis turn something over to the Palestinians, it's gone for good, at least as far as you can tell. So I rather liked that old policy of picking a fight with Israel. As a strategist, I say, yeah, good relations are not the key thing here. Warm dinners and palsy relations are not the thing. It's what the policies are and what we do and the Israelis do. So it went well. The last 4 years were a success from my point of view. Failure from Obama's point of view was success from mine. I worry that this new policy will be more successful from his point of view. That winning Israeli public opinion and having great relations and celebrating Netanyahu when he comes to the White House is going to have a cost. So I'm worried. I'm not quite as worried as you are, but I am worried too.
Yes, sir.
Here you go. I'm Ron Thompson. I have just a slight caveat to your comments. Given the radical difference in character and temperament between Mohammed and the founders of all the other great religions of the world, and you know what I'm going to ask. Why does it remain impossible to consider that Islam is our enemy and not this hybrid creature, Islamism? I might hook it up with what you just said about 1945. When we did these very wise policies, we had achieved unconditional surrender from the enemy. So why isn't it at least possible just to talk about unconditional surrender of Islam, but to make that a taboo topic, which even people on the right, joining with people on the left, won't bring up?
Okay. So why am I talking about Islamism rather than Islam? Let me start by saying that I'm a historian of early Muslim times. PhD was on the 7th century. And what I garner from my study of history is that things change. And Islam here and there and this time and that time differ. And indeed, in even my own career, which dates back to the late 60s, Islam has changed. Much more dangerous, violent now than it was then. And so I see Islam as a religion that has been different things at different times. There are quietist versions of Islam, there's Sufi versions, mystical versions, there are bellicose versions, more bellicose, less bellicose. I think it's a mistake to say there is such a thing as Islam, or the Quran is understood the same way. Yes, the Quran is understood as being the word of God, but the people interpret it are humans, and you'll find that there are contradictions and complexities and obscurities in the Quran, and they're interpreted in different ways at different times. So my view is that Islam has a legacy that is pre-modern, that Islam has not modernized, whether it be slavery or the banning of interest on money, or the notion that Muslims are superior to non-Muslims, or that males are superior to females. These are pretty standard for 500 years ago. They're unacceptable today. We've changed. And by and large, the Muslim world has not changed. And so the urgency is to get Muslims to modernize. And implicit in your question is that Muslims can't modernize, that Islam is a force that keeps people from being modern. And I disagree. I think you could have made the statement in 1942 that German culture just leads to Nazism. And I said, no, certain things happened in Germany and it led to Nazism, but doesn't mean that Germany is inherently Nazi. It meant that this was an episode, and it can be fought, it can be defeated. And I believe that Muslims can fight and defeat Islamism. Indeed, I'd say that the battle today is a civil war between Muslims, between those who want to have this regressive form of Islam that I call Islamism, and those who want to modernize. And with time, I'm getting more optimistic that the modernizers are finding more of a voice. In part, it's living under Islamism that's making that happen. Look what's happened in Egypt in the space of a year. Look at the revulsion against Morsi that didn't exist 10 months ago. He's particularly, if I might use the word, ham-handed. But same thing in Iran. It's been slower. One can even discern elements of it in Turkey, which is really a very clever government. So my mantra is that radical Islam is the enemy and moderate Islam is the solution. That we need to help those Muslims who want to be modern, moderate, liberal, to change their religion. I like quoting an Egyptian philosopher named Hassan al-Hanafi, who says that the Quran is like a supermarket. You can take from it what you will. I think change is possible. Change has happened steadily until now. Steadily, I don't only think change is possible, change must happen. But let's try and make it go in the right direction, up rather than down. And my challenge to anyone who says, as you do, that Islam is the enemy, is, well, what are you going to do? What's your solution? My solution is defeat this form of Islam, like defeat fascism and communism. It's not Germany that you're defeating so much in the end, it's fascism. It's not Russia, it's communism. It's this malign set of ideas. I want to defeat this malign set of ideas. But what does it mean to defeat Islam? What are you asking every Muslim to apostatize and leave the faith? That's not going to happen. So I don't think it's accurate, and two, I don't think it leads to any kind of policy that one can engage in. Are you saying we should engage in a crusade and kill the Muslims? These are not policies that we can pursue. So I've got an idea which I think is both accurate and feasible. Work with the moderate Muslims, the anti-Islamist Muslims, against the Islamists. And there we have a model both for winning this war and finding a solution to Islamism. A new reading of the Quran, a new way of living as a Muslim.
I know you want to follow up. Let me just take a couple more and we'll come back if we have time. Christine?
Just in terms of time frame, one of the questions in terms of prolonging the conflict there being beneficial, or at least an alternative to intervening on one side or the other, ignoring it being another way of prolonging it. There is the urgent factor of proliferation of arms in the region, and I would argue that there's three forms of that at least, maybe more. One is nuclear proliferation potentially coming out of Iran, and for that matter out of North Korea, but coming into the region. The second is the chemical weapons in Syria, and the difficulty of actually isolating and removing those or neutralizing them. Allegedly, the Israelis have identified where they are, but that's not the same thing as being able to get in and take them out. And the third is the arms that we ourselves are introducing into the region that you mentioned, not just the 140,000 canisters of tear gas, but the F-16s and other arms that are already there, including the transfer of a variety of these into Turkey, potentially from a variety of reasons, and then into Syria. So that puts a lot of urgency into the potential turning it into a very hot conflict, and also proliferation out of that region to areas in Europe, to neutral states, to Israel, in terms of actually using them in a hostile manner against all of those places, and ultimately to the United States.
And to Africa, too, the Libyan arms. So the question precisely is?
How do we deal with that? How do we deal with the proliferation issue?
The Middle East is intensively militarized, as you just documented. Many of the highest per capita spending percentages on arms are in the Middle East. Huge amount of the national wealth goes into arms. And they're used. One of the most cataclysmic wars of the 20th century was the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted 8 years and killed over 1 million people. What can we do about it? I don't know. I mean, it's like, yes, we are contributing to it, as you noted, but the appetite for arms is substantial, insatiable. There are so many hostile borders, ethnicities, and so forth. I don't think this is something that we can do much about. We ourselves, are major provisioners, for example, to Israel and to Egypt, to Iraq and Afghanistan. We try and pick the friendly forces. Often that goes awry. Our arms end up in the wrong places. But I think it's the nature of the region that has this appetite, and if we don't slake it, someone else will. I don't think there's much we can do.
And I just emphasize the point that I think both of you made, but there's an awful lot of it that's there already, not least that which has now been liberated with our help from the caches in Libya. The good news is that the United Nations has just got a new treaty, which will doubtless take care of this problem. You had a question, sir.
Good afternoon. I quickly jotted down my question so I wouldn't forget it. I'm sorry, I'm Patrick Wilson. I'm a reserve officer. And my question is, how is it that the so-called warmonger administration has passed? We have this new benevolent, kindly, liberal administration, and their president won the Peace Prize. Yet there doesn't seem to be any policy that looks like what you were saying, actually, Dr. Pipes, about creating American universities or liberal institutions, supporting liberal scholarship, any NGOs that the U.S. would commission or create in the Muslim world and the Middle East broadly. Doesn't that seem like the more typical answer? My well-intentioned liberal friends would say, you guys make war, people like me. We're going to do all these, nation-building activities. How do we get to this place where that doesn't even seem to be on the table?
You're pointing to a deep irony, which is that Bush, although he did start 2 wars in the Middle East, was intensely engaged in the nation building and all that went with that. And Obama is not. He's wrapping up the 2 wars, but is not interested in building prosperity, building peace, building freedom in the way that Bush tried, and I think failed, but at least he tried. and did so with goodwill and goodwill but poor execution. No, there is no such attempt. But I think that you're noting an oddity of American politics, how liberals and conservatives switch places quite often. And it was Kennedy who was berating Eisenhower for the missile gap. 10 years later, that looked pretty weird. And then we had Clinton fighting wars that I found pretty weird in the Balkans. Where are our interests here? It seemed to me that Democrats are willing to fight wars if we have no national interests involved. That's the standard. And they were against Kuwait because we did have a national interest involved. But Bosnia, we had none. Somalia, we had, or not none, but very small. So the willingness to go out and engage, whether it be in nation building or in making war, I think does trade back and forth between left and right in the United States, and it's an interesting pattern to observe, and you've just pointed to the latest iteration.
Yes, sir.
My name is Joel Coulter. I got pulled into doing the back office of Iraq and Afghanistan for unmanned systems, and then formed a Human Interoperability Enterprise Committee at the Pentagon. And I want to go back a little bit in Reagan, because under Reagan we had a whole society approach. There were 5 tradecraft areas that was growing, Voice of America, because we recognized how important citizen diplomacy was and citizen initiatives were. And after Reagan, that all kind of went away and it became whole of government. It became just government to government. And then in 2005, we signed a thing called Responsibility to Protect, and many people told the US not to sign that UN policy. Now, mind you, we called it only for instances when there was, really terrible killing done of a people that we would, and I think between that, the revolution of social media and the liberals' belief that if I just do crowdsourcing and I just give a bunch of money to, I can grow democracy in 1 year. We have lost the ability to understand it. A cultural transformation takes generations. So my concern is we had this thing, Peter Singh is going to be on our board of our new company because he talks about the coming drone wars. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that we as a country have told the world that these unmanned systems exist. They can buy them easily from Iran, China, anywhere else. We can't sell them because we're restricted by ITAR. So we have created an environment where I do believe we could have the coming drone wars. So what I want to ask you is, given that we have launched out this ability for people to share information freely without really change management or collaboration investment over time, we just jump in and jump out. It's like, oh, I gave all this technology of humanitarian system, and I'm leaving it with that culture. It takes 10 years. Al Santoli is a good friend of mine. You realize how, I guess the Economist magazine calls it the Sulu Mindanao model now. But he took 12 years. We helped him get money, and you have to commit for a long term. So what is your perspective? If we're not willing to commit for a long term, how much should we really engage in places that are totally, have been thousands of years in cultural conflict?
Thank you. I think with the exception of the kind of victory that we had in World War II, total victory, total defeat. You've seen pictures of Berlin and Tokyo in 1945. Unless we do that, and it's a major undertaking, we can't repeat 1945. And I'd say it's even more difficult with a majority Muslim population, which is not willing to submit in the same way that, say, Germans and Japanese were. So I don't think we should try. My advice for Iraq and Afghanistan was, get rid of the Taliban, get rid of Saddam Hussein, and then hand it over to someone reasonable that we can influence. We can push in the right direction, but not ourselves rule it. It won't work.
Is there one more? Yes, sir. We'll come back to you.
Terry Quist, USDI. Now, you've touched a bit on these subjects, but I would ask you to elaborate a little bit more, if you don't mind, on the sources of reform within Islam, speaking on the one hand of the communities, the situation of the Ismailis and the Sufi, whether they offer any hope, or on the other hand being overrun by the forces of Islamism because they don't have a modern ideology within the religious approach to the world to counterpose to Islamism as a modern ideology. On the other hand, in the intellectual sphere, do you see that anyone is deliberately taking on the medieval closing of the gates of ijtihad as being the source of the problems of Islam today, or is that still something that's largely too dangerous to do?
Well, you're pointing to two potential sources of innovation. One are the smaller sects, such as Ismailis, who have modernized very successfully, who are in India and some other countries and in the West. And they are harassed, persecuted by the Islamists, and they are very much on our side in this battle of civilization versus barbarism. And there are other smaller sects of Islam that are also potentially allies. And the second source would be those who have experienced Islamism. Iran is now a fertile ground for rethinking of Islam. Iraq is becoming as well. It's a little analogous to the Soviet Union being the home of intellectual anti-communism. The great thinkers, the great novelists came out of the Soviet bloc because they'd experienced it firsthand, knew it, knew how to combat it. And we are seeing the beginnings of that in the majority Muslim countries. People have undergone, especially in Iran, which is a quite intellectual country. So as I indicated before, I'm quite hopeful. I'm seeing changes in a way that one didn't see. In the 80s and 90s, it was Islamism regnant, intellectually speaking. They weren't controlling governments as they are now, but they dominated the discourse. And they're not so much anymore. There are breaks, and there are alternate views, and some of them really quite startling. So I see this process beginning, and I see it as hopeful.
Did you want to talk about the gates of ijtihad as well?
The notion of the gates of ijtihad, they closed around 1200. That is to say that innovation in the Sunni branch of Islam, which is 90% of it, had closed, and the basics had been worked out, and there wasn't much more to do. And this stultifying notion dominated the Muslim culture, and Sunni especially, for centuries. And in the 19th century, under European influence, Muslim thinkers began to challenge this and say, well, no, there are new developments. We have to think them through. We can't just accept decisions made hundreds of years ago. By now, that is largely accepted. The ulama, the traditional Muslim religious leaders, have been pushed aside. All the key thinkers today are either rebel ulama or not ulama at all, just autodidacts who approach Islam and have something to say about it. So I think the gates of ijtihad are pretty wide open at this point.
Sir, I promised you a follow-up question, so let's do it quickly and we'll close up.
I realize protocol doesn't allow only a short response, so I'll just say one of 10 things I could say. We have no idea what the potential dissent is in the world of Islam. We have no idea how many people, especially women, scores of millions of women, hundreds of millions, might turn their backs on this religion if we don't stand up to it. If we don't stand up to it, who are most threatened by it, why would they, whatever might be going on in the privacy of their minds, stand up? I think we miss a huge opportunity. And in terms of what you just said about the communist intellectuals, I've read Sakharov, Sharansky, and others. I don't recall if they were trying to invent a modernized communism?
Well, there are differences between communism and Islamism, and that is one of them. Let me approach your question a different way. I think that this era of Islamism that we're now in the middle of, and perhaps beginning to see a decline, though not politically, but intellectually, culturally, is devastating for Islam. I mean, Iranians who've experienced Islamism pervaded by their government for over 3 decades are in general sick of this thing and saying, if this is Islam, I don't want any part of it. And that raises the question that I can't answer, but I think is intriguing, is will Islam survive Islamism? How much damage will Islamism do? How many converts out of the religion will there be? There are tales of substantial numbers in places like Algeria and northern Iraq to Christianity, or just, not Islam. How much damage will it do? And it's a big question. I don't have an answer, but I do think there's a frailty in Islam now coming up as a result of this excess. I think Islam will survive it. I think it will adapt, but it might lose adherents. It might lose the fealty of many who are nominal Muslims. There's a kind of jihad versus crusade taking place in parts of Africa, such as Nigeria. It could be that the jihad falters and the crusade wins. Don't know. But these are very large questions about the future of Islam that are affected by events taking place today in Egypt. And what are the religious consequences of the past year, which I think is only prolegomena for the real action, which is when Egyptians start going hungry? What is this going to mean about their faith? The Muslim Brotherhood, which got started in 1928, has waited 84 years to get into power. And, God has a sense of humor. He gives them power just as the country is going down. What is this going to do to the Muslim Brotherhood and to Islam? I don't know. But these are questions to keep an eye on.
There are questions that I am quite certain we were going to be talking about for some time to come, and presumably not least in future Jackson-Kyl lectures. Daniel, you have given us much to think about, and some of the observations engender controversy. I'm hopeful that all of them will engender some hard thinking, as you have always done, and I appreciate enormously your taking the time to be with us today, as well as the time that all of you have invested in hearing what Daniel Pipes had to say. We will be making available this wonderful speech in a print of the center shortly, and you can check out the video on the website in the very near future. And in the meantime, let me just say again, on behalf of both the Reserve Officers Association and David Horowitz Freedom Center, and of course our Center for Security Policy, how much we appreciate you, Daniel, and our audience, and of course our co-sponsors. And thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. We're adjourned.